Hello and welcome to Dialogue. U.S. President Donald Trump has declared victory following the bombing of key Iranian nuclear sites. In response, Tehran condemned the outrageous U.S. strikes, warning of everlasting consequences. How much of Iran's nuclear capability has actually been destroyed? What are the next possible moves? And among the options, how likely is it for Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz, potentially triggering massive disruption in global markets? Join us for today's discussion live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are John Limbert, former Deputy Assistant U.S. Secretary of State for Iran, Sahil Shah, nuclear weapons policy analyst, and later on we have Kawa Hassan, non-resident fellow at MENA program in Stimson Center. Welcome to the show. John, I will start with you. We know that before the bombing from the U.S., the Trump administration talked about a two-window opportunity to make a decision. Obviously, they did it during the weekend instead of, like, say, 20 more days or 2 weeks, 10 more days, for example. And also, Trump said he made the decision basically disregard the assessment from his own intelligence agencies. What made him, make the decision, make the final decision to bomb Iran?
That's a very good question. I asked myself the same question, because this war started getting into a war in the Middle East. Is a political loser for Trump. He destroyed Jeb Bush in 2016 because of his brother's action in Iraq. Politically, it's been a winner for him to say, keep us out of these forever wars in the Middle East. Personally, I think he's right to do so. What changed him? I don't know. Perhaps he thought that maybe Israel would. He was convinced by the Israelis that there was an easy and cheap diplomatic victory to be had here, that the Iranians would cave. But I don't know. But in my view, he made a serious miscalculation. Which can be a loser both in domestic politics and international politics.
Mm-hmm. John, do you consider that the U.S. involvement as a war between U.S. and Iran, or simply a special military operation? Given Trump has, at least in the first place, tried not to get involved in the military, attack in Iran?
So what I consider it really doesn't matter, and also I think you have to ask our Iranian friends what they consider it. They've been attacked. Is that an act of war? To all appearances, it is. I mean, if someone were to do that to your country or to mine or to anyone else's, I think we would consider it.
Right.
We would consider it an act of war. The president may call it something. It may call it something else. But it's we have to say if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it must be a duck.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really up to the response from the Iranian side, Sahil, take a look at the U.S. tried to destroy the military facilities of Iran with the attacks on the 3 nuclear sites. It's really about how much damage and whether the U.S. achieved its goal, and of course, what are their goals here? What's your assessment here?
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, you're exactly right.
Yeah, Sahil, please. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks so much for having me. I think it's quite frankly too early to tell how significant the damage was on the 3 sites. There are many open questions as well, and there could also be more strikes by Israel, the United States, or both in the coming days, which would add to that damage. As of this minute, when it comes to specific sites, at Fordo, we saw that there have been craters from satellite imagery, but the damage underground can't be assessed yet. For example, even if the US didn't reach all parts of the Fordo complex using the bunker-busting bombs, the power from those blasts themselves might have damaged or destroyed the machinery inside. The IAEA Director General said this morning, even in a special session of the Board of Governors, that given the explosive payload that was used and the extreme vibration sensitive nature of centrifuges, because they're quite finicky, fragile devices, that very significant damage is expected to have occurred. That being said, we still will not know until the underground parts of those facilities can be taken a look at. And we don't know whether Iran can let international inspectors even do that, or whether we'll have to rely on Iran giving a damage assessment. When it comes to the other two sites, at Esfahan, we know that additional buildings were hit. Israel had already been hitting the Esfahan site, and this included tunnel entrances and uranium conversion areas. So a US submarine launched more than 24 cruise missiles, and they seemingly did do a significant amount of damage. It also, when they hit the site, they targeted the nearby tunnels where some of the enriched uranium may have been stored, but we don't know, again, the extent to the damage. Iran might have been back. We know that Iran, from satellite imagery, had been using trucks to move dirt and backfill those tunnel entrances. And there's also a possibility that Iran actually prepared ahead of time and moved the enriched uranium stockpiles from there to another location. And just briefly, lastly, at Natanz, we know that the fuel enrichment plant was hit again with the bunker busting bombs, and that only one pair was used as opposed to several at Fordo. And there's a lot of ejecta that's visible from those bombs being dropped, but it's unclear whether they actually managed to pierce the facility. So all in all, we really don't know whether or not this was successful at really eliminating these sites. We don't know whether the material was actually still there, whether it was moved to another site that was potentially hit, or that the Israelis and Americans know where it was moved to and may strike it in the coming days. And this leaves a lot of open questions. And one of the results of the US going for a military option and joining Israel in this regard is that Iran is going to become more insular. There's a much lower likelihood that Iran is now going to be open to allowing the IAEA inspectors who are currently still in Iran to take a look at anything.
Good point. I mean, yes, we know that obviously the three sites were damaged, but probably nobody is sure for how much damage, like how damaged they are. When it comes to capability, the Iranian, at least some from the Iranian side, that the ability. I mean, it's hard to destroy because it's really about the data, all the skills, the knowledge, acquired by people, by the researchers. So can we say for sure probably they still have the ability probably to do their nuclear research?
Absolutely. You cannot bomb away knowledge. You can kill scientists, you can kill technologists, you can destroy equipment, but you can't bomb away a 30+ year effort to do research and development on having a nuclear energy capacity, and more specifically, the capability to enrich uranium yourself using your own equipment. So that's why pursuing good faith diplomacy should always be the top priority, because there really is no long-term military solution. You could set the program back by, say, a few months or maybe 2 to 3 years, but at the end of the day, what you risk is that Iran changes its calculus completely, and that it does not allow inspections, it does not allow any verification and monitoring, and that it perhaps engages in either covert or overt attempts to get a nuclear weapon. So realistically, in the long term, the military option that Presidents Trump and Netanyahu have gone for might backfire. They very well likely could backfire.
Well, of course, one related question, of course, right now, people are concerned with is whether there will be any nuclear leakage, that might be dangerous, not only to Iran, but to, people in the region. I mean, how likely is that?
So when it comes to the risk of radiation, we had the IAEA Director General say even today that there isn't a risk of radiation fallout for, say, the wider Iranian public. If anything, it would be very localized because there's fissile material in the centrifuges that were likely destroyed. So although the Iranians say otherwise sometimes, there's never been a serious radiation risk from hitting Natanz. What the main risk is actually more of a chemical leak. And that's because enriched uranium is indeed radioactive, but the hazard is primarily chemical. Isfahan may be different because of the stockpile potentially being there. Again, we don't know whether it was moved or not. And of course, there are other facilities like the Bushehr reactor, which would be a totally different story because that's an active nuclear reactor. And there could definitely be radiological contamination and fallout if Israel or the United States or both were to hit Bushehr. But it's very unlikely for that reason. And also because there are a lot of Russian personnel working at that facility, and that would absolutely raise the potential of Russia being drawn into this conflict as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, in response to the U.S. strikes, John, we are seeing the Iranian side launching more missiles at the Israeli cities, including Tel Aviv, Haifa, Jerusalem, etc. So do you think further Iranian, let's say, retaliation is likely, not only targeting Israel? What are other options, except for the ongoing, strikes, counter-strikes with Israel? Is there any possibility the U.S. might be drawing in, for example, military bases? What we have, the latest is that, of course, this is from the Iranian news site, saying that the U.S. base in Syria was under attack, but we don't have more details on that, like which side launched the attack, in what way it was attacked, how much damage it was there. But anyway, is that a possibility?
Absolutely. It's very unclear right now how Iran is going to respond. Iran could either respond symbolically.
Yeah, let me have John, please. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Good. No, it's a good question. It's a good question. I keep thinking when I see this, I'm reminded 800 years ago, the Persian poet Saadi gave us very wise advice, and he said, beware of the cornered cat, because the cornered cat, with its tiny little claws, can tear out the eyes of a leopard. What will they do? What will they choose? They have targets. We've learned by experience. We learned what's happened in other parts of the Middle East and other parts of the world. There are targets out there, and to say, well, we're just doing this once, or this is a one-off, so don't worry about it. We still want to make an agreement. I don't think that's going to fly. What they will do is hard to predict. Some people talk about closing the Straits of Hormuz to oil trade, which would cause enormous disruption in the world market, including to China, of course, but everyone. Now, if they did that, of course, they cut off their own main source of revenue. So people will say, well, they'll never be so stupid as to do X, or to close the Straits of Hormuz. Well, something I learned in my 35, 40 years of working in foreign affairs and diplomacy is you don't say that. If you say they will never be so stupid as to do X, to attack Y, or to do this or that, that's almost a guarantee that they will do it. Because again, you have the cornered cat syndrome, and I think there's a danger that Iran gets pushed into a corner and reacts violently, and they have targets, no doubt about it.
Yeah, we have Kawa. So, Kawa, are you with us? So the U.S. is said to resume discussions with Iran, after the bombing. Trump said now is for peace. But we wonder, is there any trust left in the U.S. from, say, the Iranian side point of view, at least, or in what way will they be incentivized to continue dialogue with Washington? Let's have John. John, please.
Oh, okay. Well, when the president says, "Well, we want peace, we want an agreement," unfortunately what that seems to be is we want to surrender. We want you to agree to everything that we want. Well, that's not a negotiation. That's a surrender, and achieved by bashing the other side over the head. As my colleague just said, the road to making this work to achieving your goal, which is assuming the goal is to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear nuclear weapons, we found that you can achieve that goal through negotiations. You bash the other side over the head. Yeah, he may say, okay, but as soon as he can, he's going to that side is going to come back and start again. It doesn't agree. It's not an agreement. It's not a negotiation. It's a surrender, and things like that they don't last. There's no solidity in them. You can't depend on them because Iran is getting nothing out of it.
Right. Sahil, what about Israel? The U.S. involvement is seen as a success of Israeli efforts, to prompt the U.S. to participate in the bombing of Iran. Can Israel now, declare okay, mission accomplished and end the airstrikes? If not, what's to expect? And where is the end and the scenario? Where is the end point?
It's difficult to say because the Israeli operation can't sustain itself without U.S. support in some ways. So we really don't know the extent to which President Trump is serious about his diplomatic offer because, as Ambassador Limbert noted, it's very difficult for the Iranians to trust anything that comes out of President Trump's mouth anymore. So what could happen is if Iran strikes back and hits either Israel and or the United States through its bases in a very measured way, through back channels, pre-announces what it's going to do and restrains itself, and the U.S. then doesn't escalate further and Israel doesn't escalate further, we could see potentially a pause in the escalatory cycle, but it'd be very difficult to achieve some sort of diplomatic agreement during that period because at the end of the day, Israel does not want a diplomatic outcome between the U.S. and Iran. They do not want any rapprochement between the U.S. and Iran. It's for this reason that President Netanyahu tried to undermine President Obama's nuclear deal. It's for this reason that President Netanyahu undermined President Biden's attempts to restore that deal. And it's for this reason that President Netanyahu literally blew up the negotiations that President Trump was pursuing, which really had not deepened enough to bear enough fruit. They only had 5 rounds of talks. At the first few of those rounds, the U.S. didn't bring technical experts. They didn't send a written proposal to the Iranians until the 5th round. So we really did not have enough time for a diplomatic outcome. And when we talk about the escalatory cycle and whether or not we'll be able to actually pause it in a way that doesn't burn the diplomatic bridges, we have to take into account that Israel does not want anybody to walk across that diplomatic bridge. It's not a bridge that just Iran or the United States can burn. Israel plays a role as a spoiler here. So it's very difficult to say how this will continue because it isn't a contained conflict. There are a lot of different actors involved, and other actors could also be drawn in. There's a risk that this widens in some way and brings in other regional actors. I think it's unlikely, but a lot has happened in the last 10 days that we also said was unlikely. So I think we should take all possibilities into account. Again, we don't know how Iran is going to respond, but I do expect that there will be some level of military response, especially because of the U.S. strike on Fordow in particular.
Well, now we have Kawa Hassan. Welcome to the show, Kawa. Of course, we earlier talked about the U.S. bombing that could backfire, and one of the consequences could be, the Iranian response. Some analysts say Iran may now see nuclear deterrence as the only protection against future attacks, and that this will only bolster their determination to continue pursuing nuclear weapons. And of course, other people also criticizing the U.S. The bombing might be damaging to this non-proliferation regime because Iran basically has been cooperating with the, let's say, international society in terms of investigation from IAEA, and that had worked pretty well until, of course, at this point. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, regarding the thanks for having me, and sorry for the technical issue.
Thank you.
Join a bit later. First of all, regarding the possible Iranian responses, I think the Iranian regime really faces a decisive moment. Probably this is the most decisive moment in the history of the Islamic Republic since its founding in 1979. And all the options for Iran are really bad. There are no good options. So should they decide to attack U.S. bases, assets, I think based on what you have seen over the past, 3-4 days from President Trump, U.S. will respond very forcefully. And so we don't know what they would do, but they will respond most probably very, very forcefully, and may even, even regime survival may be at stake. So I think on Iranian response, again, I agree with the speaker that it's really very difficult to right now predict what would be their responses. But I think one response may be that they may, through back channel, telegraph a response on some U.S. assets, particularly on Iraq, like the one in 2020 after the killing of General Qasem Soleimani. And in this way, Iranian regime try to save face. That is one possibility. The question is, would the current Trump administration, Trump 2.0, accept that? That was accepted back in 2020. Would they accept that option? I'm not sure about that. What I think will happen, and it's actually happening as we speak, kind of increasing the attacks on Israel and even more sophisticated attacks. I think that will continue. And again, this is also a very risky, operation, because you don't know what the outcome would be, which places will be hit, and how Israel will respond. So a risky option for Iran, but they have no other option but to increase, their attacks and try also to kind of increase the level of, vulnerability for Israel. Third option, which is what I call the suicidal option, that is, trying to close Strait of Hormuz for a long time. And that would be really, I think that is the weapon of last resort in the hands of the Iranian regime. That would be very, very dangerous, may amount to a kind of, regime suicide, because it will not only impact US, but it will impact all the neighboring countries, Europe, and also the world economy. So all options, basically for Iran are really bad. They range from, suicide scenario to some sort of calculated, response to, containment response on Israel. Back to you.
Right. Kawa, let's take a look at the legal point aspects of this entire story here. Many people compare the Trump's bombing of Iran to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. How similar and different are they?
In terms of, legality of the operations?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I think obviously, this is not an operation mandated by UN Security Council, obviously, and so in that sense, this is a joint American-Israeli operation. But having said that, the political global order has changed dramatically from since 2003, and what we have basically seen in Gaza further, intensified the collapse of the rules-based international order. But I don't think U.S. and Israel will care about that anyway. They have, Israel decided to launch this operation. They have done it. They continue doing it. The same applies to the U.S. And so in that regard, that's my response to your question.
Right. Let me turn to John. John, you are a diplomat. Of course, UN Security Council authorization approval is important. In this case, it seems like UN Security Council, you can say international law, international principles. Do they still matter?
It should matter. It mattered back in 2015, 2016, when we negotiated the original JCPOA, the original nuclear agreement, and we did it with the permanent members of the Security Council, plus Germany. So it was the six, and then the Security Council essentially certified the agreement, and it mattered. It made it strong. It made it stronger, and and to all intents and purposes, that agreement was holding, and it accomplished what it was supposed to accomplish, which was to keep Iran's enrichment down below, I believe, down below 4%. Yes, legality does matter. People will ignore it. Particularly, they think they get some short-term advantage, but it matters, because if you don't have legality in the international arena, what do you have? You have chaos. You have anarchy, and I've lived through it. myself. I know what it's like, and it's not desirable for anyone.
Well, Sahil, of course, if you take a look at the response from countries around the world, especially at the UN Security Council, obviously the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, the bombing of Iranian nuclear facilities by the US marks a perilous turn in a region that is already reeling. We now risk descending into a rat hole of retaliation after retaliation. At the same time, China's Ambassador Fu Cong condemned the U.S. strikes and urged restraint. And of course here, but U.S. allies we see have obviously different opinions, attitudes here. They largely defend the strikes, saying it actually alleviates the threat from Iran's nuclear program. Are we seeing a world, as divided as ever?
Absolutely. I think that the lack of P5 unity on this is striking. In 1981, when we had the resolution that was unanimously passed by the Security Council after Israel hit the Iraqi reactor, that really highlighted a clear condemnation of those actions. It said that this was a violation of different principles in the UN Charter. And this is important because the normative aspects of this are key. We have to keep norms alive by actually responding to said violations of those norms that have been institutionalized through things like UN Security Council resolutions, the IAEA statute, and more. So, what a very likely result will be is what a Foreign Minister Araghchi from Iran said this morning, which is that what role does the Non-Proliferation Treaty or other international regimes play in protecting the interests of nations that are pursuing peaceful nuclear energy, particularly when a country's nuclear facilities are attacked and the act is proudly claimed by those responsible for it. And then the UN Security Council, the IAEA, and other international bodies fail to not just prevent it, but even condemn it. So we don't even see as strong of condemnation as we did, like I mentioned, in previous instances of Israel attacking nuclear facilities. And this is bad because it also erodes the credibility of when Western countries criticize Russia for attacking Ukrainian nuclear facilities. So the double standard is very evident. And as a result, we're already hearing signals from Tehran that perhaps the NPT doesn't really mean anything anymore for them. It doesn't offer them protection. It doesn't offer them a viable route towards having peaceful nuclear energy, because no matter what they do, they will be bombed and diplomacy will be derailed.
Right. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Chi Duo. See you next time.